Hello, anatomy and physiology students. Mrs. Whitney here. We're going to be talking today about directional terminology. So as you're probably assuming, this has something to do with directions and terms. And if you're thinking that, you are absolutely correct. So we have our own set of terms that we use all the time when we're talking about the human body in anatomy and physiology that are just going to help us to talk about organs and systems and where they are in relation to one another. So before we jump into that, I want to see what you all think. And if you could take just a few seconds to type in your responses to what would go in these blanks. So where are the eyes in relation to the nose? The belly button is blank to the chin, and the brain is blank to the spinal cord. So I'm going to take a guess that you talked about maybe the eyes being above or to the side of the nose, the belly button being below the chin, and the brain maybe being above the spinal cord. So as you might have realized, there's a few things we have to be thinking about as we're coming up with these terms, especially because there's a very, very very specific way that we are going to kind of orient the human body when we're talking about what's in it. And that is in this beautiful thing called the anatomical position. And I encourage you to stand up right now and assume the anatomical position. That is when the body is in an erect or upright or standing position with the arms at the side and the palms facing forward. The head and feet are also pointing forward. So you'll see this person over here is in the anatomical position, and then they've got all these planes slicing them into different sections. We'll talk about that another day. But the biggest thing to look at is that their face is pointing forward. Their palms are pointing forward. Oh man, what is going on over here? Ignore that. The toes, the feet are pointing forward, so they're not doing ballet or moving their arms all about. And anytime I'm asking about a directional terminology question or just talking about where things are in relation to one another, you can assume the anatomical position. If I say otherwise, then it's a different story. But most of the time, you can assume that when we're talking about human physiology and anatomy, that we are talking about someone in the anatomical position. We will, throughout this year, occasionally talk about what we call comparative anatomy, which is where we're comparing the anatomy of a human versus something else. And, there's a lot we can learn evolutionarily from that. And you'll be fascinated after we go through the bone unit when you go to the museum and you see all of the dinosaurs and you think, whoa, I recognize that bone. And you absolutely do. Anyway, so the one thing I do want to clarify here is if I'm ever talking about a biped, I usually mean a human. So something, an organism that is on two, hence the feet, which is the ped. Okay, that's why like a podiatrist is someone that works with feet. A quadruped is an animal that has, you guessed it, four legs and is walking on four legs the majority of the time. Now, because this is human anatomy, I am going to mostly be referring to a biped, but again, we will occasionally be talking about other animals and comparing us to other organisms. So just to let you know, these things might pop up. But anytime you hear quad, think four. Anytime you hear bi, think two. And most of the time, unless I say so, I am referring to a biped because this is human anatomy. All right, so we're going to move into our sets of terms here. And just so you know, all of these terms kind of come in sets of two because they're like opposites of one another, which is kind of nice. You don't have to learn all of these terms. You kind of just have to learn like one of each. But I guess you also have to, I don't know. Let's find out. So the very first set here is superior and inferior. And remember, all of these terms we're talking about are used when we're describing body parts relative to one another. So when you hear the word superior, what do you think of? I usually think of, like if someone's in a workplace and they have a superior or a boss, it's someone that's above them, right? So superior is always going to mean towards the head, or like upper or above. My arrows are really bad. I apologize. But going up towards the head is going to be superior. And then the opposite of superior is going to be inferior. So inferior is going to be towards the feet. Like if you ever have like an argument with a friend and they made you feel inferior, they kind of put you below them, right? So inferior is always going to mean towards the feet, lower or below. So go ahead and take a minute or two to see if you can fill in these blanks with the proper terms. Okay, so hopefully you took a look at this and said, all right, the eyes relative to the nose. The eyes are above the nose, but instead of writing the word above, the eyes are superior to the nose. They're also something else, but we'll talk about that later. The chin in relation to the forehead is below or lower than, so that is inferior. Okay, so there's our first set. Let's see what our next set is. Okay, our next set is medial and lateral. Medial, as some of you might have guessed, has to do with being towards the midline of the body. So what that means is that if I were to take, a marker and just draw, I'm going to do this as best I can on my little pad here. Oh, that's not bad. There is the midline of this person, right? So anytime we have something that is medial, that means it's going towards the midline of the body. Lateral, some of you have probably heard of your lats. Those are on the lateral side of the body, which is, well, I should say side. They're lateral, so they're towards the side of the body. All right, go ahead and take a second to figure out what terms you might fill into these examples down here. Okay, so as you can see, sometimes we have multiple terms here. Oh man, what is she doing to us? Well, we already know that the eyes are superior. And in this case, if we think about where the eyes are, our little person over here and their nose, the eyes are also going to be lateral relative to the nose. The belly button, however, right about here, and then the hip here, the belly button is closer to the midline of the body, so the belly button is going to be medial relative to the hip. So again, these two terms are kind of opposite of one another, just like our superior and inferior were. So just kind of always remember that for every one term, there is an opposite term, because we're always talking about where things are relative to one another. Okay, what is our next set going to be? Let's find out. Ooh, all right, anterior and posterior. So you might have heard the word posterior before, and anterior is going to be the opposite of that. If you haven't heard of posterior, that's completely okay. So anterior is always going to be towards the front of the body. And notice that my person over here changed, right? So here I had someone that was facing forward. In fact, you could also say they were facing anteriorly. Ooh, yep. Whereas here I have a lateral view of this person. And the lateral view is going to help us to see these perspectives a little bit better. So if I'm trying to label anterior on this person, it's towards the front of the body, whereas posterior is going to be towards the back of the body. I'm really bad at writing with these. So go ahead and take just a few minutes to see if you can fill in these blanks using the terms above. All right, let's see how you did. So the toes in relation to the heel, those are closer to the front, so that's going to be anterior. The nipples in relation to the lungs, which are right in here-ish area. So those are going to also be anterior. Oh boy, what did I just throw at you? In a quadruped, so this isn't something like a dog or a lizard. Where is the tail in relation to the head? Well, it's closer to the back side, so that would be posterior. Now notice that because of how this animal, a quadruped, is oriented, the terms are going to mean something a little bit different, right? So for us, in humans, in a biped, it's going to be referring to like the back side and the front side, whereas in a quadruped, it's going to be referring to like the head and the tail. So always think about the orientation of the thing that you're talking about before you think about what the terminology is. Okay, what is our next set of terms going to be? Oh, I just can't wait. Let's find out. Oh, this is another good one. So our next set is ventral and dorsal. Now, a lot of my students, when they hear the word dorsal, they think of like a dorsal fin on an elephant. Just kidding, like on a whale. And that's exactly, it's referring to the fin that's on the back of a whale or a dolphin or I don't actually know if fish have dorsal fins. Maybe they do. I don't know. If they do, then that's what it would be called. So the fin that would be on the back of a fish, if they have them, or a whale, that would be the dorsal fin. And that's because dorsal is pertaining to the back. Now, notice that for a human, dorsal is kind of still referring to like the posterior side of the body, whereas for something like an elephant, dorsal is going to look a little bit different, right? So dorsal is opposite, kind of paired along with ventral. Whenever I think of ventral, I think of like the lungs. They help you ventilate, kind of. And that's pertaining to like the front of the body or the abdomen, which is like this side of the body. So this would be ventral on a biped. This would be dorsal on a biped. Dorsal on a quadruped would be up towards the top / back, and then ventral would be down towards its abdomen. Notice that these are different in terms of quadruped versus biped when it comes to anterior and posterior, right? So anterior for any organism is going to be towards the front of the body. So on something like an elephant, this would be anterior and this would be posterior. Whereas we know on a human, those are going to be the same as ventral and dorsal. So just something to kind of point out, this is going to be different between different organisms. All right, so taking that into account, using these terms, ventral and dorsal, see if you can't answer these two questions, 11 and 12. Okay, so in a dog, or an elephant for that matter, the stomach in relation to the spine. The spine is always going to be, one of the most further things back here. We'll talk about what else is in there later on in the year, but we know the stomach is maybe going to be somewhere in here. So in a dog or an elephant, the stomach is going to be ventral in relation to the spine. What about a human? So even in a human, the stomach is still going to be ventral to a spine. I'm sorry, to the spine. Now, notice that there's still some other terms we can use here, like anterior and posterior. So in a dog, it wouldn't be anterior or posterior. The stomach would actually be, what do you think? It would be inferior. Whereas in a human, it would be anterior. All that to say that there are a few times when some terms are going to be better than others. I don't necessarily expect for you to know what those are right now, but ventral and dorsal, what I can tell you, is always going to be relating to what's happening in the trunk of the body when we're talking about the abdomen or the back. Okay, hopefully that didn't confuse you too much because we have two more terms that we need to talk about, I think. The last two we need to talk about are proximal and distal. So if you think about someone giving an approximation, they're coming up with like an estimate that's close to, an answer. So prox means close, and then dist, like distance, is gonna mean far. So proximal means that something is going to be closer to the trunk of the body, whereas distal means that something is going to be further from the trunk of the body. Now, we always talk about proximal and distal when we're talking about the limbs, or what we call the appendicular part of the body, so the arms and the legs. So we only talk about proximal and distal when we're talking about these, because we all know that, this person very well could raise their hand up in the air, and then suddenly superior and inferior mean a lot of different things. And even though most of the time people are in the anatomical position, they might not always be. So the trunk, when we talk about the trunk of the body, we are talking just like the trunk of a tree is kind of like the base, the main support. All of your main, organs that support you are here. So this right here is the trunk of the body, and then all of these other pieces, your arms and your legs, are part of your appendages, or your appendicular part of the body. So we use proximal and distal when we're referring to things on your arms and on your legs. So proximal means that something is closer to the trunk of the body. So on the arm, it would be pointing up towards the shoulder joint. On the leg, it would be pointing up towards the hip joint. Distal is if something is further away from the trunk of the body. So it would be if we're looking at something here on the hip in relation to the ankle or whatever, that would be distal. And then same thing with the arm. If you're looking at something on the shoulder in relation to the wrist, for example, I should say wrist in relation to the shoulder, that would be distal. So all that being said, see if you can fill in these blanks. Okay, hopefully you looked at this and said, all right, the wrist is blank to the elbow. It's further away from the trunk of the body than the elbow is, so that must be distal. Whereas the ankle, in relation to the knee, that's also distal. Wait, she didn't give us two different answers? What the heck? Think about in your head how you could write something that is proximal. Really all you'd have to do is take one of these and flip them, right? So the knee would be proximal to the ankle. So that's also kind of cool. You can always flip these questions around and use the opposite term. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. These terms are definitely going to be coming back throughout the whole year, and you're about to do another activity with these. I hope you stuck with me through all this. Thank you all for bearing with me, and we'll see you soon. Okay, bye.